The smell hit me first. Lavender and something sharper, like citrus mixed with cold metal. I was standing in the doorway of my mother's bedroom, the one she kept locked when she thought no one was paying attention. The afternoon light came through the blinds in thin, measured lines, cutting the room into strips of gold and shadow. I wasn't supposed to be there, but the key had been left on the kitchen counter, half hidden under a dish towel. And curiosity is a patient thing. Inside, everything looked ordinary at first. The bed was made with hospital corners the way she always did it. A small lamp sat on the nightstand, its shade slightly crooked. But then I saw the suitcase, half open at the foot of the bed. It wasn't ours. Not the scuffed navy one we took on family trips. This one was sleek, charcoal gray, with a luggage tag that had a name I didn't recognize. Claire Whitman, not Claire Harmon, not my mother's name. I knelt beside it, my knees pressing into the carpet's rough weave. Inside were clothes I'd never seen her wear. A silk blouse the color of wine, tailored trousers, a leather wallet with cards bearing that same name. Claire Whitman. There were receipts, too, folded into tight squares. Hotel stays in cities we'd never visited as a family. Dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce. My hands started to shake, and I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to steady them. Underneath the clothes, I found a phone. Not her usual one. The one that buzzed on the kitchen counter every morning with reminders and grocery lists. This one was slim, silver, password protected. I tried her birthday. Nothing. Mine. Nothing. Then, almost without thinking, I tried the date she and my father got married. The screen unlocked. My stomach dropped. The messages loaded slowly, like the phone was reluctant to give up its secrets. There were dozens of threads, all with the same contact, J. The tone was warm, familiar, intimate in a way that made my throat tighten. Miss you already. Can't wait for next weekend. You make everything better. I scrolled back, weeks, then months. The messages stretched back over 2 years. 2 years of another life, running parallel to ours, invisible. I heard the front door open downstairs. Her voice called out, light and easy. I'm home. Anyone here? I shoved the phone back into the suitcase, my fingers clumsy and cold. I stood, smoothed the bedspread even though I hadn't touched it, and slipped out of the room. My heart was a fist, pounding against my ribs. I made it to my own room just as her footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Dinner that night was unbearable. She sat across from me, smiling, asking about my day in that gentle, measured way she always did. My father talked about work, something about a client meeting that went well. My younger brother complained about his math homework, and I sat there, fork in hand, pushing peas around my plate, watching her, watching the way she laughed at my father's jokes, the way she reached over to ruffle my brother's hair, the way she looked so perfectly, convincingly normal. I couldn't eat. The food tasted like cardboard, like ash. I excused myself early, mumbling something about homework, and went upstairs. I lay on my bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every message I'd read, every hotel receipt, every lie she must have told to make it all fit. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache, was that I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was holding. Over the next few days, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed the way she checked her phone when she thought no one was looking. The way her expression would shift, just for a second, into something softer, something distant. I noticed the new perfume, the one that smelled like jasmine, and something I couldn't name. I noticed the way she said she had errands on Saturday mornings. Always alone, always vague. I followed her once. I'm not proud of it, but I did. I borrowed my friend's bike and trailed her car from a distance, my legs burning as I pedaled to keep up. She drove to the edge of town, to a small café I'd never heard of. I watched from across the street as she went inside, and a few minutes later, a man joined her, tall dark hair going gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that looked expensive. They sat by the window and I could see them talking, laughing, At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. I rode home in a daze, my vision blurred, my chest tight. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It felt like crying would make it real, would cement it into something I couldn't take back. So I just pedaled faster and faster until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed on the front lawn, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of the shape my life had suddenly taken. That night, I almost told my father. I stood outside his study, my hand raised to knock, the words lined up in my throat. But then I heard him humming some old song he loved, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the one to break him. So I turned around and went back to my room, and I carried the weight alone. A week later, she left for a work conference. She kissed my father goodbye at the door, told us she'd be back in 3 days, and drove away with that charcoal suitcase in the trunk. I watched from my bedroom window, my forehead pressed against the glass, my breath fogging the pain. And I knew she wasn't going to any conference. I couldn't take it anymore. That afternoon, I sat my father down. My brother was at a friend's house. It was just the two of us in the living room, the air thick and still. I told him everything. The suitcase, the phone, the name, the man at the café. I watched his face change, piece by piece, like something inside him was crumbling in slow motion. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. When I finished, the silence was so heavy I thought the house might collapse under it. Then he stood, slowly, like his bones had aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. He thanked me. His voice was quiet, hollow. He said he needed to think. And then he walked upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door close. She came home 2 days later, smiling, carrying a bag of pastries from some bakery we'd never been to. She set them on the counter and asked how everyone's week had been. My father didn't answer. He just looked at her, and I saw something pass between them. Something sharp and final. She stopped smiling. They talked behind closed doors for hours. I sat on the stairs, my arms wrapped around my knees, listening to the rise and fall of their voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I could hear the shape of it. The anger, the pleading, the breaking. When the door finally opened, my mother's face was streaked with tears, and my father's was stone. She moved out a week later, not far, just an apartment across town. She said she needed space, needed time to figure things out. But we all knew what it meant. My brother cried every night for a month. My father stopped humming, and I stopped feeling like I knew who anyone was. Months passed. The house felt different, quieter, colder, like something vital had been removed, and we were all just going through the motions. She called sometimes, asked to see us. I went once. We sat in a park on a bench, and she tried to explain. She said she'd felt invisible for years, like she was disappearing inside her own life. She said she didn't plan for it to happen. She said she was sorry. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to understand. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of carrying secrets. Tired of watching my family fall apart. Tired of wondering if love was ever enough, or if it was just something people said until they found something better. I don't know if we'll ever be whole again. I don't know if my father will ever hum those old songs, or if my brother will stop flinching every time someone mentions her name. I don't know if I'll ever stop seeing that suitcase, that name, that other life she built in the margins of ours. But I do know this. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If this story left a mark on you, leave a word below. Just one. Suitcase, invisible, or double life. One word can open the next door. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because it was trash day, and the sound of the garbage truck grinding through the neighborhood felt like the perfect soundtrack. My father signed them at the kitchen table without reading them, his pen moving in slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't say anything. He just slid the papers back into the envelope, sealed it, and left it by the door for the mailman. Then he made coffee, like it was any other morning. I wanted to ask him how he felt, but the question seemed too big, too sharp. So I just sat across from him, watching steam rise from his mug, curling into shapes that dissolved before they could mean anything. He looked older. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his shoulders curved inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller, trying to take up less space in a world that had already taken so much from him. My brother stopped talking about her. At first, he'd ask when she was coming home, when things would go back to normal. But after a while, the questions stopped. He buried himself in video games, in homework, in anything that didn't require him to feel. I envied him for that. His ability to shut down, to compartmentalize. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that suitcase, that name, that other version of my mother, the one who belonged to someone else. She tried to stay in our lives. She'd text me, asking to meet for coffee, for lunch, for anything. Sometimes I'd go. We'd sit in diners with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out. And she'd talk about her new apartment, her new job, her fresh start. She never mentioned him, Jay. But I could feel his presence in the gaps between her words, in the way she smiled when her phone buzzed, in the perfume that still smelled like jasmine and lies. One afternoon, she asked me if I hated her. We were sitting in her car, parked outside a grocery store. Rain drummed against the windshield, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and green. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that I hated her for what she'd done, for the way she'd dismantled our family, like it was something disposable. But the truth was more complicated than that. I don't know, I said finally. My voice sounded small, distant, like it was coming from someone else. I don't know what I feel. She nodded, her hands gripping the steering wheel even though the car wasn't moving. I understand, she said, but I don't think she did. I don't think she could. My father started dating someone new about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Her name was Angela, and she was kind in a way that felt almost aggressive. Always smiling, always asking how we were, always trying too hard. I wanted to dislike her, wanted to resent her for stepping into the space my mother had left. But I couldn't. She wasn't the problem. The problem was that there was a space at all. My brother liked her. He'd laugh at her jokes, help her cook dinner, let her ruffle his hair the way my mother used to. Watching them together made something twist in my chest, something that felt like relief and betrayal all at once. I was glad he was happy, but I also felt like we were erasing my mother, like we were pretending she'd never existed. And maybe that was easier. Maybe that was what we all needed to survive. I saw my mother less and less. The texts became sporadic, the invitations fewer. She said she was busy, that work was demanding, that she was finding herself. I didn't push. Part of me was relieved. It was easier not to see her, not to sit across from her, and pretend everything was fine when we both knew it wasn't. It was easier to let her fade into the background, to become a memory instead of a wound. But then one night, she called. It was late, past midnight, and her voice was thick, slurred. She was crying. I made a mistake, she said. I ruined everything. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Where are you? I asked. She didn't answer. I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of engines, the distant wail of a siren. Mom, where are you? She hung up. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat there in the dark, my phone clutched in my hand, panic rising in my throat. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if she was safe, if she was alone, if she was about to do something she couldn't take back. So I woke my father. He called her, then called the police. They found her an hour later, parked on the side of a highway, her head resting against the steering wheel. She was fine. Physically, at least. They took her to the hospital for observation. My father and I went to see her the next morning. She looked small in the hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She apologized. Over and over she apologized. To my father, to me, to herself. She said she didn't know who she was anymore, that she'd lost herself somewhere along the way, and didn't know how to find her way back. My father didn't say much. He just stood by the door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But I sat beside her bed, and I held her hand. It felt fragile, like it might break if I squeezed too hard. "You can't do this," I said quietly. "You can't fall apart. Not now. Not after everything." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I know." She started therapy after that. Real therapy. Not just the kind where you talk about your feelings for an hour and then go back to pretending everything's fine. She worked on herself slowly, painfully. She stopped reaching out as much, stopped trying to force her way back into our lives. And in a strange way, that distance helped. It gave us all room to breathe, to heal, to figure out who we were without her. A year passed, then another. My brother graduated middle school. My father married Angela in a small ceremony in their backyard. I started college, moved into a dorm, began building a life that didn't revolve around the wreckage of my family. And my mother, she stayed on the periphery, a presence that was felt more than seen. We'd talk occasionally, brief conversations that skimmed the surface of things. It wasn't much, but it was something. I don't think I've forgiven her. I don't know if I ever will. Forgiveness feels like something you're supposed to do, something noble and healing. But the truth is, some wounds don't close. They just become part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't have to forgive someone to move forward. Maybe you just have to accept that they're human, that they're flawed, that they made choices you'll never fully understand. I think about that suitcase sometimes, about the name that wasn't hers, about the life she built in secret, the one that felt more real to her than the one she had with us. And I wonder if she ever thinks about it too, if she ever regrets it, if she ever wishes she could go back and choose differently. But I'll never ask. Some questions don't have answers. Some doors are better left closed. If you've carried a secret that changed everything, if you've watched someone you love become a stranger, leave a word. Suitcase, stranger, or double life. Just one. It's enough.